The Grand Conclave of Xenophysics on the orbital ring of Sylvanar was the single most prestigious gathering of minds in the Galactic Accord. For 1,000 cycles, the greatest theorists from a dozen species had met to discuss the fundamental laws of reality, to refine their exquisite technologies, and to bask in the serene certainty of a universe fully understood. The air hummed with the low-frequency contentment of the gravitons, a species who perceived higher mathematics as melody. Sleek holographic schematics, representing the pinnacle of clean energy generation and subspace manipulation, floated in the zero-gravity chambers. It was a temple of knowledge, and its high priest was senior theorist Calix of the Xeni. Calix, his slender, chitinous form, adorned with badges of academic honor, was presenting the final, flawless proof for the unified field dampening theorem. Thus, as the harmonic resonance of any baryonic matter is irrevocably locked within the 7th subspace band, external manipulation beyond a factor of 1.337 is a literal impossibility. The laws are settled. The equations are beautiful. There is nothing left to force. A polite wave of agreement ripples moved through the assembled scientists. Then, a new star appeared on the long-range monitor. It was the human delegation ship, the Curiosity's reward, finally arriving after a tedious journey from their backwater system. "Ah, the newcomers," Calix said, a faint click of dismissiveness in his voice translator. "Let us welcome them and show them the light of true understanding. Perhaps they can be taught to appreciate the aesthetics of a closed equation." The human ship that docked was, to the Conclave's eyes, a mess. Its hull was a patchwork of different alloys, with external sensor pods strapped on haphazardly. It looked less like a vessel and more like a flying junkyard. The delegation that disembarked was equally perplexing. Leading them was Dr. Aris Thorne, a man with greying hair and eyes that seemed to squint at reality itself. Beside him was Commander Elara Vance, her posture rigidly military. But it was the third member who drew bewildered stares. He was a young man, maybe 25, dressed in stained cargo pants and a faded shirt with a cryptic logo. He wore a large set of goggles on his forehead and carried a heavy toolkit slung over one shoulder. His name was Leo Tails Tamura, and he was, as Dr. Thorne introduced him, their applied resonance engineer. He didn't look at the beautiful holograms. He stared at the junction where the docking umbilical connected to the station, tapping a wall panel with a knuckle and listening intently. "We are honored," Dr. Thorne said, his voice carefully diplomatic. "Humanity is eager to learn from the Conclave's advancements." Clix gave a shallow bow. "We shall begin with a tour of our primary zero-point energy tap. It is the practical application of the very theorem I just elaborated. It provides clean, limitless power for this entire station by gently resonating with the quantum foam. It is, if I may say, perfect." The tour was a disaster from a diplomatic standpoint, but fascinating from a human one. As Kilix explained the exquisite precision of the energy tap, a series of glowing rings humming at a pitch that made human teeth ache, Thorne asked thoughtful questions about theoretical limits. Vance analysed the security and structural layout. Tails, however, simply frowned. "The damping field is out of phase by 0.02% on the lower left quadrant," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through Clix's lecture. The chamber fell silent. The gravitons emitted a discordant hum of shock. "That is impossible," Calix stated, his translator flattening his tone. "The system is self-correcting to within 1 part per trillion. Your organic senses cannot possibly perceive that." Tails shrugged, walked over to a secondary access panel, and, without asking, popped it open with a tool from his belt. Inside was a labyrinth of glowing crystal circuitry. "See here, this tertiary harmonic stabilizer. It's got a microfracture. It's compensating, but it's creating a standing wave in the containment field. It's inefficient." He pulled out a device from his toolkit that looked like a hand-held oscilloscope crossed with a toaster. He clipped a probe to a crystal. "You're losing about 3 megawatts of potential yield, and if that fracture propagates, in about 600 cycles, the dampening field will flutter during a high-energy draw. Probably nothing major. Just a local space-time hiccup might make this section of the ring taste purple for a minute. Calliope's was rigid with outrage. You are touching a masterpiece with a primitive probe. And your analysis is childish conjecture. Taste purple? That is not a scientific metric, but the station's chief technician, a bulky, practical-minded Tarkellan named Gor Rook, had lumbered over. His species valued function over form. He peered at the crystal tails indicated. With a magnifying lens, he grunted. The human is correct. There is a fracture. Submicron. Our diagnostics did not flag it, because it does not yet violate any system parameters. The following days continued in a similar vein. At the sublight propulsion array, Tails listened to the hum of the gravity drives and commented that the inertial dampeners were fighting each other, causing a 5% drag. A recalibration, he suggested, which involved manually tweaking two emitters with a physical wrench, proved him right. In the Habitat Life Support Nexus, he diagnosed a slow leak in the atmospheric recycler, not by reading the complex logs, but by smelling the air and pointing at a specific valve assembly. Seals warn. You can't smell the lithium hydroxide? It's faint, but it's there. The conclave was scandalized. This human wasn't using their sublime mathematics. He was using intuition, sensory perception, and a disconcerting habit of treating flawless technology like a malfunctioning ground car. Dr. Thorne watched with growing interest. Fans kept a protective eye on Tails, aware of the rising irritation they were causing. The breaking point came during a demonstration of the conclave's ultimate achievement, the quantum communication beacon. It could send information instantaneously across light years using entangled particles. Calix presented it with reverential pride. Not even light itself is faster. The bond is unbreakable. The fidelity perfect. It is the final word in communication. The device was a shimmering sphere of suspended particles in a vacuum chamber. It was beautiful. Tails walked around it, his goggles now over his eyes, his handheld device whirring. The entanglement is stable, Calix said, a challenge in his voice. Do you have a practical observation, Engineer Tamura? Tails took off his goggles. Yeah, it's a one-way phone, and you can't turn it off, can you? Turn it off? Why would one turn off perfection? The connection is eternal, so you're just constantly pouring energy into maintaining a link, whether you're sending a message or not. And if someone on the other end figured out how to modulate the carrier wave, they could listen in. Or maybe even inject a signal back along the entanglement pair. It's not a phone. It's an always-open microphone. Calix's carapace flushed a dark shade of embarrassment anger. Preposterous! The carrier wave cannot be modulated. It is a pure state. You speak of things you do not comprehend with your wrenches and your smell. That evening in the humans' assigned quarters, Thorne faced Tails. You're not making friends, Leo. They're wrong, Doc, Tails said, his usual casualness gone, replaced by a fierce intensity. Not about the math. The math is probably gorgeous, but they've confused the map for the territory. They built a perfect castle on what they think is the only possible hill. That comm beacon? It's a security nightmare wrapped in a pretty light show. Vance leaned forward. You're saying we can eavesdrop on their most secure channel? I'm saying, Tails corrected, a slow grin spreading across his face, that with a decent power source and a magnetic bottle we can cobble together from the reward spare parts, I could probably tap it, not break it. Listen. Maybe even whisper back. Thorne stared at the young engineer. The conclave had all the knowledge in the galaxy, but they had Tails, who looked at a masterpiece and saw the loose screw. It was time to stop being polite students. Do it, Thorne said, quietly. Show me what the ground looks like. The air in the human quarters aboard the Sylvanar ring had taken on the distinctive smell of hot ozone, stressed electronics, and instant coffee. In the center of the main room, a grotesque sculpture of technology had grown. It was built from spare parts, cannibalized from the Curiosity's reward, a secondary power coupler, the magnetic containment housing from a broken fusion torch, several kilometers of high-grade wiring, and the primary sensor array from a survey probe. all wired into a jury-rigged console covered in flickering readouts and manual switches. Leo Tails Tamura moved around it with the focus of a surgeon, his goggles displaying cascading streams of data only he could fully interpret. Aris Thorne watched, a data slate in hand, cross-referencing Tails' wild, intuitive leaps with conventional human physics. Commander Elara Vance stood guard at the door, her posture taut. What they were doing was, at best, a gross violation of diplomatic protocol. At worst, it was espionage on an unimaginable scale. They're so focused on the purity of the signal, they forgot about the box it comes in, Tails muttered, adjusting the polarity of a makeshift superconducting coil. The entanglement is perfect. Yeah, but the particles are here, in this chamber. The chamber has a magnetic field to keep them suspended. That field is generated by an emitter. That emitter runs on power. Everything around the perfect core is just engineering. And engineering has scenes. He tapped a final key. The jerry-rigged device hummed, a sound that was fundamentally different from the serene harmonic tones of conclave technology. This was a gritty industrial growl. On the main screen, static resolved into a pattern, a complex, shimmering waveform. That's the carrier wave, Tails said, pointing. The eternal connection. It's not data, it's just a steady-state hum, like a held note. All their messages are encoded as microscopic variations in this note. Their theory says you can't modulate the note itself without breaking entanglement. But, he grinned and threw a heavy-duty switch. A deep, resonant thump echoed through the device. On the screen, the perfect waveform shuddered. Like a pond hit by a stone. For a fraction of a second, it distorted. "What did you do?" Thorne asked, leaning closer. "I gave the magnetic bottle a hiccup. A tiny, localized flux change. Not enough to disrupt the particle pairing. That's quantum, it doesn't care. But enough to briefly alter the environment of the local particle. And because they're entangled, on another screen, a data log began to scroll. It was a fragment of a conclave communication, a routine systems check between Sylvanar and a research outpost. It was garbled, filled with error symbols. "You corrupted their signal," Vance said, a note of awe in her voice. "I talked over it," Tails corrected. "For a nanosecond, my magnetic shout was the dominant influence on this end of the pair. The outpost heard my shout, not their whisper. They think it was cosmic interference. The implications hung in the air, thick and electric. The conclave's perfect, unbreakable comms were vulnerable not to a superior theory, but to a simple physical intrusion. Their experiment was interrupted by a priority alert from the conclave. Senior theorist Calix's face, tight with a mixture of fury and profound anxiety, appeared on their wall screen. "Human delegation. You will report to the main observatory immediately. Our situation has arisen." The situation was a cosmic catastrophe. A deep space monitoring station had reported the sudden, violent destabilization of a nearby micro-singularity the conclave used for gravity lens research. According to every model, such an event was impossible. The singularity was stable, its parameters locked by the immutable laws the conclave revered. Yet, it was now emitting erratic gravitational pulses, threatening to veer out of its containment orbit and into the shipping lanes. In the observatory, a panic council of scientists argued over equations, their beautiful theories offering no solutions. The dampening fields are at maximum. The harmonics are all wrong. It defies the unified theorem. Clix turned to Thorne, desperation overriding his pride. "You're engineer," his perception of flaws. Could he look at the telemetry? Perhaps there is a simple malfunction our diagnostics overlook. It was a stark admission of failure. Thorne nodded. "We'll assist." Tails didn't look at the elegant equations modelling the singularity. He went straight to the raw, messy sensor feed, the gravitational readings, the EM spectrum bleed, the particle counts. He scrolled through it, his eyes moving faster than anyone could follow. "You've been poking it," he said flatly after a minute. "Poking it?" a graviton scientist chimed, their tone a dissonant chord of offence. "Yeah, You've been using synchronized gravity beams to calibrate its event horizon, right? Part of your research. Look here, here, and here. He highlighted 3 spikes in the data. These aren't natural. They're the echoes of your calibration pulses. But your pulses are mathematically perfect. They're based on a model of a perfect isolated singularity. It is perfect and isolated, Clicks insisted. No, it's not, Tails said with the patience of someone stating the obvious. It's sitting in space. Space has dust, micrometeoroids, random hydrogen atoms. You've been hitting it with perfect pulses for cycles, and every now and then one of those pulses hits it at the exact same time a bit of space junk falls in. It's like ringing a bell with a perfect hammer, but sometimes a fly hits the bell at the same time. It changes the note. You've been feeding it tiny random bits of extra energy at resonant intervals. You've been overwinding it. The observatory was dead silent. The concept was horrifyingly simple. Their perfect experiments had neglected the imperfect reality of the universe. Can you fix it? Thorn asked quietly. Tails chewed his lip, staring at the data. Their solution is to apply more perfect theory. That'll just make it worse. We need to detune it. Hit it with something messy, something random to break up the resonant pattern it's locked into. You propose to assault a black hole with noise, Clicks whispered. I propose to save your shipping lanes with a carefully calculated distraction, Tails said. He turned to Goruk, the Tarkellan technician. I need access to every non-essential power generator on the ring, the comm system, the secondary drives, the waste reclamation pulses, anything that can generate a strong, dirty electromagnetic or gravitational pulse. And I need to control their firing sequences manually. It was an act of technological blasphemy, but with the micro-singularity's pulses growing stronger, they had no choice. Goruk grunted assent. For the next 6 hours, Tails became the conductor of a chaotic orchestra. He took control of 100 different inelegant systems across the station. He fired the waste recyclers in a staccato rhythm. He pulsed the docking thrusters. He ran the backup communication lasers at full power, modulating their beams randomly. To the conclave, it was pandemonium, a screeching affront to order. Tails fed all this chaotic energy, focused and aimed via the station's main sensor array towards the micro-singularity. It wasn't an elegant dampening field, it was a barrage of informational static. On the monitors, the perfect, terrifying rhythm of the singularity's pulses began to stutter. The chaotic interference from the ring was breaking the resonant loop it had fallen into. The pulses grew less frequent, less intense. After a final, staggering series of mismatched bursts from the station's kitchen plasma ovens, which Tails had commandeered, the singularity's readings smoothed out, settling into a new, stable, slightly different configuration. The crisis was over. Clicks looked from the saved shipping lanes to Tails, who was wiping grease from his hands, surrounded by the evidence of his technological riot. The senior theorist's entire worldview, built over centuries, had a crack in it. The human hadn't used a better theory. He had used a different one, a theory of practical, messy, adaptive intervention. He had fixed a divine clock by throwing sand in its gears. Your methods are incomprehensible, Kalik said, his voice hollow. Tails just smiled. You guys look at the universe and see a finished painting. We look at it and see a workshop. Sometimes the workshop gets messy. The mood on the Sylvanar ring had shifted from condescension to a bewildered, wary respect. Senior theorist Calix moved through the gleaming halls, with a new tension, his mind wrestling with the heresy that had saved them. The human, Tails, had not disproven their laws. He had demonstrated that the universe was a noisier, dirtier collaborator than their pristine equations allowed for. It was a profound philosophical shock. This shock turned to cold dread when the emergency alarm sounded, not for a scientific anomaly, but for a security breach. The station was under attack. From the observation deck, they saw the vessels. 3 sleek, predatory ships of unknown design, their hulls absorbing light rather than reflecting it. They moved with silent, impossible grace, ignoring the station's hails. They were not of the accord. "The Borvek!" Gorak growled, his thick fingers flying over a defensive console. Marauders! Theoretical postulates. They are said to use weapons that manipulate quantum probabilities themselves. They are ghosts in the machinery of reality. As if to prove his point, one of the Borovac ships fired. There was no beam, no projectile. A section of the ring's outer hull simply unhappened. One moment it was there, a lattice of metal and composite. The next it was a cloud of disconnected, non-functional atoms, as if the bonds holding them together had been told to forget their purpose. 100 souls were silently erased from existence. Panic, a raw and unfamiliar emotion, swept through the conclave. Their defensive shields, designed to dissipate energy, were useless against a weapon that negated coherence itself. Their own elegant particle beams lanced out, only to dissolve into harmless light before reaching the enemy ships. The Borovac technology was a direct attack on the concept of order, the very foundation of conclave science. "We cannot fight this," a scientist wailed. "Their weapons violate causality." On the human deck, Thorne, Vance and Tails watched the destruction on a monitor. Vance was assessing military tactics, her face grim. They're targeting power junctions and shield generators. They're surgical. Our weapons are useless. Thorne turned to Tails. "Leo, their tech. It's like a more violent version of what you did to the comms and the singularity. It doesn't break things. It convinces them to break themselves." Tails was already at his jury-rigged console, his goggles plugged into the station's battered sensor net. He watched the data stream from the attack. It's a probability weapon, like Gorak said. It's not an energy blast. It's a command. It tells a localized area of space-time that the most likely state for those atoms is to be unbound. And reality listens. He frowned, his mind racing. But to do that, it has to calculate that new probability. It has to solve for the quantum states of every particle in the target zone, instantly. That's an insane amount of processing power. It's not magic. It's just really, really fast and specific math. "Can you block it?" Vance asked. "Block a thought?" "No," Tails said. Then his eyes lit up. "But you can give the thinker a headache. A really, really bad one." He began typing furiously, his plan forming in a chaotic burst. Their weapon needs a clean, predictable target to solve for. The Conclave's perfect orderly technology is the easiest possible target. It's like a clear, still pond. You can drop a stone and see exactly what happens. But what if the pond is full of frogs and boats and someone's throwing firecrackers in? He opened a comm channel to Klix and Gororuk. "Listen, you need to give me control of everything again. Not just the junk systems this time. I need your primary gravity drives, your shield emitters, your main reactor harmonics. Have you lost your organic mind?" Klix's voice was shrill. "We are under attack. We need those systems for defense." "Your defense is their breakfast," Tails shot back. "They eat perfect order. We need to feed them chaos. Gorok, trust me." There was a heavy pause, filled with the sound of another section of the station dissolving. Then Gorok's voice, solid as stone. "You have control. Do what you do, human." What Tails did was unleash technological anarchy. Using his cobbled-together interface, he seized the symphony of the Sylvanar ring and turned it into a cacophony. He ran the gravity drives in reverse pulses at random intervals, creating stuttering, unpredictable gravity waves that warped space around the station. He modulated the shield frequencies chaotically, not to block the Bohr-Hevik weapon, but to create a shimmering shell of nonsense data. He even tapped into the station's internal transit system, firing maglev trams back and forth at max speed, introducing violent kinetic variables. To the Conclave, it was the end of everything they held dear. Lights flickered madly. Artificial gravity slewed sideways, then upside down. The air hummed with a dozen conflicting frequencies. It was sheer, utter madness. The lead Borovac ship fired again. The probability beam lanced towards the main reactor core, but on its way, it passed through Tails' deliberately crafted storm of chaos. The beam's targeting scanners, expecting a stable, solvable system, were suddenly flooded with nonsense data, random gravity spikes, EM static, fluctuating mass signatures. The quantum calculation engine aboard the Borvek ship, tasked with finding the most probable dissociated state for the reactor, choked. The probabilities became a blur of white noise. The beam struck. Instead of clean dissolution, the reactor housing warped, twisted, and partially transmuted into a pitted, strange alloy, venting plasma in a conventional, messy explosion. It was damaged, but not disintegrated. The weapon had failed. A ripple of what might have been confusion seemed to pass through the attacking ships. They fired again at a shield generator. Tails responded by overloading a bank of sensor arrays next to it, creating a blinding burst of EM radiation. The probability beam interacted with the burst, causing a section of the hull to not vanish, but to crystallize into a bizarre silicon foam. The Borvek ships hesitated. Their ultimate weapon relied on a predictable, lawful universe. Humanity, through Tails, was offering them a riot. "Now, Commander!" Tails yelled to Vance. Vance, who had been waiting for this moment, sent a command to the Curiosity's reward, which had been hiding behind the station's chaos field. The human ship didn't fire lasers or railguns. It fired modified survey probes, simple physical projectiles, packed with crude EMP charges and clouds of radar-confusing chaff. Dumb weapons. Unpredictable weapons. One probe, its guidance scrambled by the local chaos, veered wildly and slammed into a Borvek engine nacelle. There was no probability calculation for a drunk missile. It exploded in a very normal, very energetic fireball. The Borvek ship, its perfect symmetry broken, began to list. Seeing their invincible weapon neutralized and their ships now vulnerable to conventional chaotic damage, the remaining Borvek vessels disengaged, vanishing into subspace with silent frustration. The ring was saved. The cost was immense. Whole sections were on fire. Gravity was still unstable, and the main reactor was critically wounded. But it was there. In the smoke-filled control room, Clix approached Tails, who was slumped over his console, exhausted. The senior theorist looked at the young human covered in soot and sweat, the architect of the madness that had been their salvation. "You fought a probability manipulator with random number generators and magnetic noise," Clix said, his voice filled with a kind of terrified awe. Tails looked up, a tired smile on his face. "Yeah, they were trying to have a rational debate with the universe. We just started yelling and throwing things until it went away." Clix gazed out at the damaged, humming living station. The beautiful, perfect laws were still true, but they were not the whole truth. The universe had a tolerance for mess, and humanity had just shown him how to use it. He saw not the end of his science, but the dawn of a terrifying, vibrant new chapter, one that required not just theorists, but engineers who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. "Teach us," Clix said, the words leaving him in a rush. "Teach us how to see the seams." Tails laughed, a short, honest sound. "Okay, but first, you gotta get yourself a good wrench, and maybe learn to smell a problem coming."